Okay. Okay, it is exactly 8:33 p.m. Tuesday, March the 2nd, 2021. Welcome to week number 4, week 4 of Introduction to Criminal Law. I'm Professor Richard Wright, and I'm going to spend roughly the next hour or so going over the materials for this week. I do want to remind you that if you want to see the feedback for your grades, and if you submitted more than one attempt, make sure you use the first attempt to see the feedback. The feedback is always under the first attempt, not repeated under the second attempt. So if you just looked at the second attempt, you wouldn't see it. You have to make sure you see it under the first. Okay, and make sure that you cover that. I have not finished grading week 2. I will be finished this week and begin working on week 3. I do want to let you know that by the end of this week, and I do mean by the end of this week, which would be Sunday, this Sunday coming up, you will not be able to submit assignments from week 1 to 3 unless special arrangements have been made, and no one has reached out to me for that. You will still lose points, and as far as submitting live classroom lecture points, you're still going to lose points there because the fact that you only get 5 points for it, and it's going to run out within 5 days. So if you submit that late, after 5 days, it's going to be a 0. So that's why it's so important to make sure that you get the information for the keyword either during the live lecture or either before 5 days pass after the due date. So let's go ahead and let me share my screen with you. And here we go. Let's move this up here. Okay. Here's my adversity springboard to success. Your week 1, 2, and 3 lectures are recorded down here. So now we got 3 more lectures to go. And after today, it'll be 2 more lectures. Okay. Over here, again, is the rubric for the week 4 assignment. And it tells you what you need to do. And I'll cover that in more detail. This is going to be a 2-page minimum requirement for part 1 with APA citations, and then a 1-page flyer that you'll see. We have a template in here for you. Make sure that you do them all, as I always remind you, in Word document and not any other way, because you will not get it graded. So now let's quickly take a look at the course calendar. Here we go. And you can see this is where we are. We are now in March, and today is the 2nd. So your initial post is due tonight, obstruction of justice. Your reading assignment was given yesterday, and this is the information here. And then Saturday, the 6th, your reply post. And then Sunday, your written assignment is due. Fleeing or eluding police, that's what I just showed you the rubric on a few minutes ago, and I'll go over that in a minute. And then There it is, the written assignment. And then the live classroom lecture. Those are the assignments for this week. Notice this, the 7th, okay? The 19th, class ends. That's a Friday. So by the time you reach this Friday, the 5th, you'll have 2 weeks and then the course will be over. It does not end on Saturday. It does not end on Sunday. 11:59 p.m. your papers will have to be in. Okay? Very important for you to pay attention to that. All right. So now let's go back and let's look at the announcements for this week. So our announcement for this week, crimes against government and public order. Chapter 8 of the textbook and the corresponding PowerPoint. Did you guys get the PowerPoint for this week? Type in the chat box yes or no. Did you get the PowerPoints? Okay. Because I sent them out and you were able to open them up. Okay, because one student told me he couldn't. I told him it had to be something wrong with his system because I checked them and you could open it up. So anyway, yeah, yep, you download them, you can open them, absolutely. And then topics: domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct, and free speech will be dealt with tonight. And then we'll just briefly show you the key terms, which I told you they fixed them and put them into a Word document. And then practice free speech or disorderly conduct and the quiz. I hope you guys all did well on the quiz. That was due Sunday. That was your midterm, basically. It automatically grades it, so I don't take a look at it. But hopefully you did pretty well, because the next one will be yeah, that's what I always say. Yeah, if you get that done and then look at the practice quizzes, then that helps you to do well with the quiz. So the next one won't be until week 6. That's the last quiz that you guys have in this course, which is really like a final exam. So, okay, let me fix that. Okay. So now, that's a little, I like that angle better. All right, so now let's take a look at, let's close this down so I can get rid of that. Let's go into the module and take a look at the assignments. So your discussion, obstruction of justice, using this scenario, and consider the case of Terry versus Ohio. And then you're going to deal with these issues in your initial post. And then you're going to contrast with another student, defend your position in all 4 questions in the reply post with a different student's position. All right. Now for the written assignment. As I already said, this is a 2-part assignment. Part 1, examine the types of crime committed. So you're going to use this scenario. And in this part, you'll examine the landmark U.S. Supreme Court cases relating to fleeing police. Now, there's some information down at the bottom here that helps you out there with that right here. All right, so you're going to deal with the facts here. And a minimum of 2 pages, APA, double space, citations throughout the paper, references at the end. And you're going to deal with these issues 1 to 5. And then make sure you cite your sources, including a reference page, and then APA citations, as I said, throughout. Double space. Then you're going to use the sample statute. I think the answer is yes. I want you to cite the sample pursuit policy in the paper. You cite it, but you don't have to, you don't, put the whole thing in there. But yeah, you always cite sources that you use for information. Get into that habit. That's what I've been saying all along. Okay. And so then in your flyer, sample statute, then you're going to use the template. There's a template there that helps you out to deal with pursuit policies. Please make sure it's original. Don't just copy one from somewhere. And you can take some of their material, but make sure it's very original. I run all of them, and notice that you can create your flyer from scratch using Microsoft Word or Publisher. Don't use Publisher. Use Word. Use Word. One more time. Use Word. So there are going to be students who say, oh, it says you could use Publisher. I said use Word. Use Word. Okay. Or you can use the template as a starting point. Most students will use the template, but it's still going to be a Word document. And then it tells you, be sure to use appropriate tone and language and cite your sources in appropriate APA format. All right. Then you have this guide that helps you as well, we've been talking about. So now let's look at the rubric again in detail. For 40 points, due Sunday the 7th. Again, examine the types of crimes committed, and you're going to deal with all these issues in a 2-page minimum. Now, if you were to look at in the grade book, after I grade them, you will see a section under this one that says feedback. And you'll be able to see that feedback. Remember I said if you submitted more than one attempt, the feedback is most of the time in the first attempt, not the second attempt. Some students think that, oh, they look at the second attempt, which is the last one, and they get the same grade as before, and they say, I don't see any feedback. That's because you didn't look at the first attempt. And so for 5 points, you can make sure that your spelling, your paragraphs, your double space, and all of that's written appropriately. And then the APA requirements. No Wikipedia. Make sure you use credible sources. Then 15 points. And I've seen students who they will do the first part, but they won't do the second part, and they'll lose 15 whole points. So that drops you all the way down to 25. Okay, a 1-page length. Okay, make sure you cite your sources as well. Any questions about the written assignment? Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? No more questions? That means everybody's got it. Okay, so make sure. All right. Now, the last thing that you have is your live classroom lecture, which I'll give you the key phrase or word during this lecture. All right, so now let's take a look at the issues that are involved here. So again, it's chapter 8. So we're going to deal with domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct and speech. And then we'll close out by looking at the key terms for practice and then the practice quiz, just a few points of that. So domestic terrorism, as you should be aware, unless you've been on an island with no internet, no TV, no radio, none of that, that we are currently in a situation where domestic terrorism is a primary issue that we're dealing with. The example, one of the last examples is the insurrection that took place January 6th on the Capitol. And notice what the purpose of that was, and that was an attempt to prevent the duly selected states from certifying the election that had already been certified, should I say, but a formality where the vice president presides over and the individuals from the Senate and the House come together. And as you saw, and right now it's currently under investigation. So there's debate now with the FBI about who's responsible for it. Some people said Antifa. The FBI said nope. Some people even said Black Lives Matters. I said, I know you're kidding. Nope. And so the issue that they concluded was it was Trump supporters. Not all Trump supporters, but those who were involved, radicals, groups like the Proud Boys and other organizations, white supremacists. And so we are in a situation now in this country where there's a rise of domestic terrorism taking place. If you recall, a few months ago, before the election, the governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, the FBI uncovered a plot to kidnap her because she was telling people to wear masks and to stay safe. And so there are groups that were involved that were trying to adversely affect the operation of government. So if you are attempting to adversely affect the functioning of government or the use of force, then you are dealing with terrorism. The FBI says terrorism is the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate, of course, a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of a political or social objective. That's exactly what I just described that took place in Michigan, as well as what took place in the nation's capital. I heard somebody try to use the term domestic terrorism for what happened after the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. But those were different. There was not an attack on government. It was crying out against violence against certain groups. Here, in the two that happened in Michigan and in DC, it was a direct attack on government officials to not carry out the requirements of the law. And they were not led by some foreign country like Russia or some outside organization, but right here in the United States of America. So it happened, as they said, I never thought I'd see that. I'm sure many of you, if you're real, would sit up and say, I just never thought I'd see this, where your legislators were being sought out by mob activity to kill them merely because they were doing their jobs. We can disagree with people politically, and so we have this process called voting. And for another discussion about now what the attempt is to do and change that, dealing with voter suppression, but I'm not going into that. But I am going to make it quite clear that you understand that any attempt using coercion or violence is domestic, that happens on our soil. It says it can be targeted at a cause or by a specific entity. The point of the matter is that it's an attempt to control the government, and it happens on our soil. International terrorism, on the other hand, deals with the 4 points that I'm about to give you. Acts dangerous to human life that occur primarily outside the U.S. or upon U.S. soil by a foreign terrorist organization or member that violate the laws of the United States or the states, that appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a government, or intimidation or coercion, affect the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Now, September 11th, some of you may or may not know about it because you were probably too young, or maybe were born after that. But the point of the matter is that the greatest, it was like it was yesterday. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I remember where I was when I saw the tower to go down. And also, they played it so constantly that it reminded us. I saw people jumping out of the building because they were coming down. And so this is an attack or a demonstration of international terrorism because they were carried out on U.S. soil by foreign terrorist groups. So that is one I will never, ever, ever forget. And it set the stage and changed how we function in our lives. The Patriot Act was passed, which dealt with how to handle international terrorists. And there was a question about violating the constitutional rights of people. Well, here's the point. If you're a terrorist, I think you're putting yourself in a stage where you can create or take the life or seriously injure many other individuals. And remember, the purpose for the activity is to get the government that they attack to let them know that they didn't like what they did. And so that's a form of international terrorism when it involves a foreign organization. So the one that we'll always remember is that one. Another one that was before your time, and actually before my time, but I studied in history, was Pearl Harbor, which took place, I believe it was December 4th. I believe it was 1941. I wasn't born until 50, but that's another example of international terrorism where Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, which was, Hawaii and our military base. But the one that had the most impact upon our lives is the September the 11th. I mean, it changed how you can travel. It changed how much you can carry on airplanes, what you can carry on airplanes, and a whole lot of things. So we haven't, and so we haven't returned to pre-September the 11th since that time because of this thing called domestic terrorism. So now let's talk about some examples of domestic terrorism. One of them is the Oklahoma City bombing. Some of you may remember that, and that was in 1995 with Timothy McVeigh and Terry. I can't think of the other Terry's last name, but both were United States citizens. And the federal building in downtown Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City, the parties used a large truck bomb that killed 168 people and injured more than 600 men, women, and children. There was, in fact, a daycare in the building that killed many children. And so their motivation was an incident that happened at Ruby Ridge, where a federal agent was killed along with a 14-year-old child. And so Timothy McVeigh and his partner believed that Ruby Ridge incident was improperly handled. And so think about that. They believe it was improperly handled. So what do? They kill more people. Something's wrong with that rationale and thinking. So that's an example of domestic terrorism. Another is the Olympic Park bombing. Some of you may or may not know about that one, where Eric Rudolph targeted anti-abortion clinics. And the point of the matter is that it had to do with that. And the bomb was placed at the Olympic Park. So it depends. It depends on who's characterizing it. Okay, so the question is, when it comes to that, it says, are riots considered domestic terrorism? I know you touched on what happened at the Capitol in January. Would riots like those in Minneapolis, Kenosha be considered as domestic terrorism? No. Remember what I said earlier, and some people might stretch it to include it. Was the intent of Minneapolis or Kenosha to overthrow the government or get the government to do something different? Or was it done to demonstrate dissatisfaction with a part of the government that violated the rights or civil rights of an individual or individuals? Which one was it? They were dissatisfied. But somebody might say, well, so too were domestic terrorism. However, the difference is this, is that Do you think that the things that took place in Minneapolis, I mean, let me put it to you this way. I'm in law enforcement. I teach law enforcement. I've been in law enforcement. I've represented defendants. I've seen individuals go to jail who were wrongfully convicted, and a disparate impact upon minorities and people who look like I do. And so I feel differently about that than I do about what happened in the nation's capital. And the reason why I feel differently is that they were trying to overthrow an election. Do you get my point now? And then the other thing was this: those two incidents in Kenosha and Minneapolis were, even though it wasn't exactly correct, because let me explain something to you about domestic terrorism that sometimes take place. There are individuals, and I know this for a fact, that will cause violence and promote violence to take you off of the main issues as the reason that people are protesting in the first place. Like, for example, was it domestic terrorism for the people in front of what they called Black Lives Matters Avenue or Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House to protest? And then the former president decides he wants to do a photo op, so he has the people tear gassed. That right there would encourage a response of violence on the part of the parties. So that's where I am there. And somebody might say, well, it still results in some attempt to change the government. Not necessarily. Those individuals that attacked the Capitol, were they exercising their constitutional rights, or were they exercising their rights to protest something that was a violation of their rights? Wasn't a violation of their rights to vote, because of the lie and the falsehood that even exists today. Did you see CPAC? That the election was stolen. You know what? But uh, there's a whole nother perspective that goes with that I really don't like, and I won't elaborate on it. But the point of the matter is that there's a difference in apples and oranges there. I didn't say that they were correct in terms of that, but there are people who are opportunists who will play a role in that. Because to be honest with you, not Timothy McVeigh, but George Floyd's family, as well as the young man who was shot, which I think was unjust, the way he was shot. And it made the people feel like the police were able to just get away with something and just do things. Once again, we begin to understand that this is an attempt to let people know that they didn't like what happened. Somebody else say, well, in the Capitol, they didn't like what was happening. Yeah, but what they didn't like what was happening was something that was legal that had taken place already. Was it legal to take the life of George Floyd? Probably not, because there were charges that were brought against the police. Was it legal what was done with the young man in Kenosha? In my opinion, the answer is no. But it all depends on who's making the call and decision. So, and that's not over yet. So anyway, so now I answered the question. So who investigates domestic terrorism? there are a lot of individuals who are involved. They're first responders. There's the federal government. There's Did you not know that the FBI investigates domestic terrorism as well as even the CIA? And then we now have Homeland Security. You have your local authorities, your state authorities as well, to deal with domestic terrorism. For example, dealing with the Oklahoma City bombing, it was a trooper who stopped, as it says, Timothy McVeigh for a minor registration violation. He had no idea who that was. And then that's how he was caught. Eric Rudolph was apprehended by a patrol officer who was checking behind a strip mall and found him lurking in the area. So all levels of law enforcement work on that. It says, although the federal government has primary jurisdiction when prosecuting domestic terrorism, this says the above examples highlight the importance of all levels of law enforcement working together. Okay. I grew up in an era where I remember, and I know you guys don't because you weren't born then, in 1968, I was 18 years old. And when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, there was mass riots that took place because people were frustrated and saw that one of the greatest civil rights leaders was assassinated because he was trying to help people of all races, all backgrounds. And so it was bad what some people do, but there are people, like I said again, who will take that opportunity to do things that they shouldn't do, again, to take away from the real deal, and that is the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, but I remember that like it happened yesterday. So I've kind of grown up in an era where I've seen that before. So now let's talk about obstruction of justice. So what is that? Obstruction of justice can be as simple as not telling the truth, deliberately misleading the police, or withholding information that prevents the government from effectively investigating a criminal matter, such as perjury on the stand. When you testify, either before, like for example, a government entity like the House, the Senate, or either city council, county board, or those kind of things, then you don't tell the truth or you lie, then you could go to jail for perjury. And perjury is obstructing justice because the purpose of it is to hide information. So when you take an oath or affirm, then you must tell the truth. One of the things that was really important for people to realize and know, and I know this because of my legal background, is that those attorneys that represented the former president in all those cases where they lost, the major reason that they lost is that they didn't put on any evidence. Because if they had put on evidence that was fake or false, they could be guilty of perjury. But if they just put on what they believed, then the courts will rule that there's no evidence to substantiate your allegations or claims and dismiss the cases. And that's what happened. So in other words, they would have, all the stuff that you heard them talking about outside the courtroom with the media and at different sessions or meetings, if they'd have done that in court, they'd have been behind bars for perjury. So obstructing of justice on the streets is when, for example, you're stopped by a police officer and you lie or mislead the police in the performance of their duties. One of the major ones that we're familiar with here in our area is the Jesse Smollett case. Are you guys familiar with the Jesse Smollett case? Jesse Smollett was a young man who was on the TV show Empire that was on. And he lived in Chicago, and he alleged that he was assaulted by two guys wearing MAGA hats, Make America Great Again hats. Well, as it turned out later, it was discovered that it really didn't happen, and that he might have even paid the individuals, or that there were two black guys that were Africans who were involved with this. And in fact, the police were investigating and looking and put a lot of manpower into looking for a person because they thought it was a hate crime because he's gay. Well, as it turned out, it was conjured up. And so he suffered some issues with it. The case was dismissed in our jurisdiction. However, though, now it is still back open where an independent prosecutor is looking into it. But anyway, that's an example of that. But we could have it so minor as being asked your name and you provide false information, or that you hide someone out the police are looking for. And so I, I often tell my clients when I was practicing criminal law and they get arrested, I said, give your real name. Don't try to give a fake name, because they'll take that name. And then if you ever come up again in another case, that alias will haunt you, and it will let the judge know that's maybe setting bond for you that you've had contact with the system. And so the point of the matter is that any attempt to frustrate an investigation by law enforcement, falsely providing information to a law enforcement officer, an agency, or some state agency. So that's the crime of obstruction of justice on the streets. All right. So I'm not going to get into that much more. Here's an example, though. The person has committed or is about to commit a criminal offense, and the person witnessed any of the following: an offense of violence that would be a felony offense, any attempt of conspiracy to commit or complicity in committing an offense listed above, any conduct listed above that has been or about to be committed. The point of the matter is that in many jurisdictions, the failure to disclose that information could result in obstruction of justice. And then you take a look at the Terry versus Ohio. Everybody should be familiar with the Terry versus Ohio. We call that the famous stop and frisk case. And we came up with the phrase that's commonly referred to as a Terry stop. And that's a brief stop to question individuals and to determine if that individual commits a crime. It's not an opportunity to complete a complete search. So anyway, there are statutes in many jurisdictions that can send you to jail for providing false information, like failure to identify yourself. And in some jurisdictions, it is illegal if the police ask for your identification for you not to show it. or for you not to have any on you, those kind of things. But not all states do that, but we are one right here in Illinois. Okay, so you got the obstruction of justice. Resisting arrest. What is that? Very simply, when you fail to follow the instructions of a police officer, any resistance. Now, here's something that I teach people all the time, and I use myself as an example. Even if I'm wrongfully stopped by a police officer, I will still cooperate with that police officer, and I will, get notice the information, observe, get their badge number and things like that. Watch for their nameplate. But now you have video cams, body cams that help. But here's what you don't do. You don't fight the police there on the streets. Where do you, and when I use the term fight, I guess I shouldn't use that word fight, because sometimes people use that word fight to think that it means violence. But if I say to resist the police or to challenge the police, where's the best place to challenge them? Anybody want to tell me? What's the best place? That's it, Bryce. In court. And I have had that happen. Because once they get into court, I have my opportunity to do so, to deal with the issue. Also, another thing that you can do is file a complaint with the agency that oversees the agency or police officer or law enforcement person that was involved. But the worst thing that you can do is try to flex your muscles in the streets. That can be bad. Okay, let me see that question again. Is resisting arrest and unlawful fleeing each? No, we're not talking about obstructing justice when we start talking about resisting arrest and unlawful fleeing. No, we're talking about something totally different. I told you what obstructing justice was. When you have a situation where you're resisting arrest, then that means that you have done something to try to stop the officer from placing you in control or under arrest. By the way, how do you know when you are in custody? I've talked about this before. Anybody know? Do you have to? Well, yeah, okay, you use the Miranda rights, but how do you know when you use them? Do you have to say you're under arrest? Is it possible for a person to be under arrest and never hear the phrase, you're under arrest? Is that possible? It is. It is possible. The clear answer is when you're not free to go. If you even as simple as to ask the police, can I go? And they say, no, you cannot go. Then at that point, you are under arrest because you're under control of the police. Does that make sense? And at that point, if they're going to ask any questions, it is advisable to give the Miranda warnings. So look at what it talks about, two forms of custody. it can be either explicit or implied. The one that you guys are familiar with and that Bryce had mentioned a minute ago is very clear. It's called explicit custody. When a law enforcement officer says you're under arrest and tells the person to put their hands behind their back. The implicit custody is less clear and concerned with what I just said. What a reasonable person would believe at the time of the police encounter, when individuals reasonably believe that they are not free to leave during the encounter, that they are then under arrest. So let's use the facts and circumstances here. For example, it says if a detective had been invited inside a person's home to speak with him, and they spoke face to face at the kitchen table, this is not an arrest or custodial questioning. On the other hand, if the police officer brought 4 uniformed police officers with him and surrounded the suspect on all 4 sides, that leaves the perception that the person is not free to leave. This would be considered as under arrest. You got it now? No, 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 no. Remember, stop and frisk is very simply what we call a brief stop to question an individual. And so, no, you can't place a person under arrest, but upon probable cause, with a warrant, or either if there is an exception. So no, stop and frisk does not fit that. Resisting arrest can take form, as I said, such as punching, kicking, in other words, doing things that are very minor can simply result in that. So the point of the matter is that when you deal with what we call the Terry stop, that person's not under arrest because they're not in custody. They are being stopped to ask questions. But what if you stop them and they break out and run? Then in that case, then we're dealing with a fleeing or eluding. Got it? Then at that point, then you stop them. Then you can place them under arrest because they have violated the law. All right. So then brings us to the point that I just got through talking about. And it makes it crystal clear. Sometimes resisting a police officer is obvious, especially if a suspect flees. That's what I just said. Fleeing includes running away or getting in a car. Getting in the car, of course, is inherently dangerous. And police officers and other individuals are injured seriously or killed. And even doing a foot chase with a suspect, more officers, innocent civilians, and suspects are seriously injured. But that happens with vehicle pursuits. And so we come to the point of dealing with fleeing and eluding, and then how police are held to a standard and policies which we have, and I was trained as to how to deal with individuals who were in vehicles, who were fleeing. And there were certain things that we had to be cognizant of, making sure that we took into consideration the possibility that we could kill someone innocent, injure someone innocent, or kill ourselves or either our partners. And so we have been trained to deal with, and remember, a vehicle, dangerous. I can tell you there's a call that we had with the police called Run Silent, Run Deep. And what that meant is that the police are coming, but there are no sirens, but they have their lights flashing, and they'll go. But the point of the matter is that when you're chasing an individual in a vehicle, you have to be very careful, because you have to take into consideration these bullet points that I'm about to cover. What time of day is it? The volume of pedestrian and vehicular traffic, the nature of the offense. What they do, steal a loaf of bread and they jump in a car? Are you going to pursue them at high speeds for that? You get fired, seriously disciplined. Weather and road conditions, speed of the pursuit, and the officer's speed and ability to drive. And so there's what we call sample police pursuit policies. You got an assignment dealing with that. So we have to be very mindful that when a vehicle pursuit takes place, we have to keep those factors in mind that I just got through talking about. And determine, as it says here, if the pursuit outweighs the necessity or immediate apprehension, then discontinue or terminate the pursuit. Like what I just said a few minutes ago, a loaf of bread or a candy bar or something like that. But let's say if an individual has a weapon or something like that, that is different. But we have tactics that they teach us, such as force to stop, induce to stop techniques. And we're just going to talk about a few of those, such as ramming the fleeing motorist. Now, you have to be careful. You don't want that motorist to turn over or lose control of that vehicle. And so we oftentimes will use call ahead and have roadblocks, and we'll do different things. But we have to be careful about dealing with the speed. The Scott versus Harris case is a Supreme Court case that you want to take a look at concerning these type of techniques. But let's show you some of the things that we learned to induce individuals to stop. We call it the PIT, Pursuit Intervention Technique. And if you'll notice that the police car will strike the back part of the car to get the car to turn around in a circle and to spin, and then the vehicle would probably stop because there'd be no fuel going to it, and it would cause it to stop. All right, and sometimes the person can end up in a ditch or something. So you have to be very careful about that, though. We did some tests where we actually did this on a closed course, like a range. Stop sticks. These are situations that are placed across the road, so that if a person drives over them, they're going to have a flat tire. Now, they're not going to lose control, but what it's doing is going to cause the tire to deflate slowly, and then the individual will come to a stop. Partial roadblock, where we have a squad car, but sometimes individuals will run into that. But we use a combination of things like the sticks as stop sticks, as well as a partial roadblock. Boxing in, you've seen that before. You ever remember the OJ? Even if you don't remember it, actually, if you ever saw it, the vehicle was boxed in on all sides. They couldn't go ahead. They couldn't stop, and then they couldn't make a left or right because there were cars on all sides. And then so the advantage of this, in a way, is that you force the individual to finally stop. However, the individual could have a weapon, and that's one of the problems that go with that. So those are just some of the the techniques there that we have here. The final thing that I'm going to talk about is disorderly conduct. And I'm just go through that quickly. Basically, disorderly conduct is providing a situation where you want to promote violence. You want to incite violence. That's why the words that the former president used to fire up those people in Washington got him in trouble. You use fighting words is what we consider, because he kept saying fight like hell, or said, and then, you know, the people were already fearful about what was going on with the election being stolen, that he had perpetrated, that lie, that it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. And so what it did was fire the people up even more. And, you know, the people then began doing what they had to do. However, though, that's only part of that, because actually it was discovered later by investigation that there was planning done for this. It wasn't spontaneous, in other words. So in other words, using fighting words or challenging someone to fight, that can create what we call disorderly conduct. And the First Amendment does not protect that. According to Black's Law Dictionary, which is a dictionary that we lawyers are familiar with and law students, a tumultuous disturbance of the peace by three or more assembling together of their own authority with the intent to assist each other against anyone who shall oppose. That results in what we call a riot, and can result in property loss, physical injury, and even sometimes death to people. And then here is something that you can take a look at to see about this. This is about 35 minutes. It's a good video. You get a chance to take a look at it. And so these are some other links here. So that's it. That's it. So now let's go back and let's look at the key terms. Remember, I told you earlier, they fixed it. So we click on this link and it opens up a Word document. That you can download. And then open it up. I'm opening it up so you can see it. And it gives the definitions behind the words that are critical that you want to remember for purposes of preparing for your exam that'll be coming up in week 6. Okay, it's going to open up in just a second. There we go. So these are the key terms for this module: domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, perjury, explicit, implicit custody. It's a summary of what we just went over: resisting arrest, fleeing, eluding, due regard, and riot. So you can save that as a way to study and be prepared. All right. Now for practice, we're going to ask you a few of these, and then we're going to get you out of here. So I'm going to ask you, a man is walking in the middle of the street in a busy downtown entertainment district yelling profanities. Is this free speech or disorderly conduct? Okay, let's see if that's right. And the answer is yes. This is disorderly conduct because they use it to incite a breach of the peace. Abortion activists are standing on a street corner holding signs of aborted fetuses that some citizens have cited as offensive. Is this free speech? It sure is. You might not like it, and it might be offensive, but the signs, it's a peaceful protest on public property, and the signs are not considered to be vulgar. Let's do one more. Edward is watching a movie with some friends inside a theater. that is half full. Edward says to his friend, "Watch this," and he yells, "Fire!" causing patrons to run out of the theater. One patron calls police and complains. Is this free speech or disorderly conduct? Which one? Yeah, because you subject a panic to take place, and someone could be injured or killed. So you can go through those. Then finally, we come to the all-important practice quiz. Remember what I told you? By the way, you took the exam. Did you see what I was talking about as you were taking your actual quiz, what I said about these practice quizzes? Okay. That is the optimal way of getting ready for it. But you use those others too. So let's show you. A local resident is suspected of setting off a truck bomb at a religious temple, intentionally targeting parishioners. This is an example of what? Which one is it? Okay, echo. Did we talk about eco terrorism? Actually, eco terrorism is basically poisoning the water, the air, or something like that. Okay, so you say international. It says a local resident. Yes, setting off a truck bomb. What incident that we talked about that reminds you of? The answer is the Oklahoma City bombing. Yep, Oklahoma City bombing. Carried out by terrorists who are from within their own country, a local resident. Okay. Okay. A foreign living in your community is part of a terrorist organization from another country and intentionally blows up city. Okay. That's like I like jump out. They told you foreign living, a foreign national. Okay, and it's part of a terrorist organization from another country. They gave you two reasons to call it international terrorism. Exactly. You stop a man that you believe was about to break into a store, but stopped when he saw your marked squad car. You question him and he lies about his name. What will you place him under arrest for? Two of these answers just shouldn't be right away, don't apply. Well, you'll get caught. One jumps out right away. Yeah, that's the answer. Burglary, okay, because you see they're breaking into a store. But the key thing is, what was he placed under arrest for? You believe, you believe that he lied about his name. He didn't commit perjury because in order for him to be guilty of perjury, he would have had to been placed under oath. I don't know too many people get stopped on the police. Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear to tell the whole truth. No, it doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen like that. That's at a courtroom hearing or either some kind of hearing. Resisting arrest. Um, so, but yeah, it's obstruction. So you see why resisting and obstructing are two different things? Okay. One last one. A police officer is testifying under oath about an arrest that he made and lies. What criminal law will that officer be charged with? Come on, you know it. There it is. Okay. Soon as it says under oath, they're setting it up for not tampering, not conduct unbecoming. That might be true too, but obstructing, no. But perjury, that is it. That's it, based upon what we learned. And so that's it, guys. So you study these, and they will help you to do well. Okay. Let me see that question, because we're about to adjourn. Do I recommend preparing for the Mod 6 quiz just like we did? Of course. Of course. Remember what I said this earlier in the course, that the second quiz has to do with modules 4, 5, and 6. So whatever you did for modules 1, 2, and 3, you were preparing for the quiz in week 3. Yep. That's a good question, though, because it's been a while. We're already in week 4. Okay. Seemed like we just started, though, the other day, though, doesn't it? Okay, guys, I'm going to say good night to you. Any questions? I haven't said it yet. So anyway, I'm going to give it to you. I'm not going to make you guess today. Okay. Domestic terrorism. Give me that. And you get your points. And I'm not going to repeat it. I already said what it is. All right. I can have somebody already come back and says, you didn't say what the key word or phrase is. Oh, yes, I did. And I'm not saying it anymore. So put your points in the Dropbox, put your phrase in there, get your spelling right and all of that. So I'm going to say good night to you guys. I'll see you next week. Remember what I said at the end of week number 4, you can no longer submit any assignments for week 1 to 3. All right. So good night. I'll see you next week. Stay safe. Enjoy this week. We've had some pretty nice weather here, so I'm not upset. So take care. See you then. Thank you.